My very good friend, Mary Ann Birch, former president of the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce, has asked me to give a little history maybe of the Chamber of Commerce. I thought maybe I would go back to the times that I know very, very well, and that is prior to World War II in Frankfort, we had an association called the Frankfort Board of Trade. It was made up primarily of downtown merchants that wanted to promote sales. We wanted to have special sales. I remember we even started capital value days where we all decided that we would have really a loss leader, so to speak, would be one item that we'd all certify that it was a loss leader, that we were selling it at a loss, so that we would get the customers into our different stores, and it worked very well. However, along came World War II, and a good many of us went into the service. And then when we got back in the fall of 1946, the same group of downtown merchants decided that what we really needed to do was to expand the membership a little bit. Our primary objection was, however, to get new industry into Frankfort. That was our primary concern. I guess it was a selfish motive in a way. But we had, at that time, we had General Shoe, and we had Union Underwear, and we had some of the distilleries, of course. But we felt like that we needed to expand the industry, which we did do. So we formed the Frankfort Chamber of Commerce. Actually, it started in the fall of 1946. Then we got into 47, and we then, of course, got ourselves pretty well organized, and I was elected as the first president of the Frankfort Chamber of Commerce. We were very fortunate, I guess, in that we were able to entice some industries that would come into Frankfort. I remember Farnham Dudgeon, and his outfit was in Chicago, and we enticed them to come to Frankfort and open up a place here, which they did do, and it was a very fine organization. There were many other industries, and as you can see, we finally developed an industrial park, and that was quite a story, really. I won't try to take up too much time, but the fact of the matter is there was some farmland out by a jet that became available that was for sale. So we all got together, and we also went to the banks, and the bank said, okay, you fellows, each one of you, put up $1,000. If you don't have the cash, you'll sign a note. So Mary Ann Birch, I'd like to tell you that it only took one day, and we raised enough money to buy the farmland, and that's the way the industrial park started by the Chamber of Commerce, I would say. Mary Ann has asked me to go back and sort of even review some of the early chambers of commerce. They have some pictures of some chamber members going all the way back to 1915, 1916. And I must say this, that one of the first persons, some of the people, of course, Mary Ann, I didn't know real well, because 1915 I was quite a small boy. But nevertheless, Mr. David P. Davis was a very fine young man that was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce at that time. And they ran I. Davis Clothing Store for Men. It was located down by Selbert's. And I distinctly remembered this fellow's father, old Mr. I. Davis. He said, Frank, he knew that I probably would go into the hardware business with my father. He said, one of the things you want to do is stay close to the front door and greet the people as they come into your door. It's very, very important. I always remembered that, and he was a certainly a very fine person, there's no doubt about that. Another fine man that I thought an awful lot of was Mr. Elliott, and Mr. E.H. Elliott was the president of the Capital Lumber Company, and it was I guess in those days, 15, 16, it was the biggest lumber company in town. There was another fellow by the name of Mr. Bronner, and Mr. Bronner was a contractor, and he was also in the feed business, and he had his place out on Home Street, a very nice place. And then we had the next man that they probably want me to talk about is a fellow by the name of John R. Sower, was on the board. He was my father, and I could talk an awful lot about him, of course. My grandfather came to Frankfort, Marianne in 1868, right after the Civil War. He was on the Union side, but he had a brother that went south and joined the Confederate forces. But getting back to my grandfather, he came to Frankfort in 1868, and he was in the bakery business with his brother and also with a fellow by the name of Ayler, and some of their descendants are still here in Frankfort. And then my grandfather was about to retire when he had a son by the name of John R. Sower. My grandfather's name was Peter Christian Sower. He had the son, John R. Sower, which was my father. And my father loved sports. He was a great baseball player. He played a lot of baseball. And my grandfather finally said, look, I need to get back into business. I think I'll get into the hardware business, so my son, John R. Sower, will have a job. It just so happened in 1916 or 15, or about that time, the building across from the courthouse burned in the site where our building is located now, right across from the old courthouse building at the present time. And my grandfather went around and bought what was left of the burned out building and the site, and that's where in 1916 it was completed, the present building, and my father went in there in the hardware business. Prior to that time, up on Main Street, they were in the hardware business up there, but they moved after the fire down to the site across from the courthouse. My father passed away in 1937, and I hadn't gotten married and was hardly through running around when my nickname at that time was Piggy, and I never will forget a lady who I'd known for a long time. Mrs. H.P. Mason was her name. She finally, after my father had passed away and I was trying to run the hardware store, she came in and she said, Piggy, what is your name? She didn't know that my name was Frank because everybody called me Piggy. There was another fellow on that picture by the name of Mr. H.H. Phelps, and he was the Franklin County farm agent at that time. I did not know him very well. Another fellow was the name of Mr. J.B. Bacon Blanton, who I did know very well. He ran the Blanton Lumber Company, which is right up there by the Capitol Avenue Bridge. I always had a soft heart for Mr. Blanton because I never will forget, just before I went into the service in World War II, he wrote me one of the nicest letters that I ever received. And I mentioned it to Alice Blanton one day, and she said, yes, Frank, I remember that letter very well because I was the one that typed it. Another gentleman that was on the board at that time was a fellow by the name of Senator Spears. And Senator Spears was in the banking business, so to speak, at that time. The president of 1916 Chamber of Commerce was a fellow by the name of W.H. Hogue. W.H. Hogue, he lived, if you know where Liberty Hall is, right across the street there on Wilkinson Street, is the Crittenden Garrard House, and that's where he lived during that time, and I remember him quite well too. The next fellow on the list is a fellow by the name of Joe Leopold, and he was the secretary of the Chamber of Commerce, and I think that I'm correct in that he probably was connected with the YMCA. Another gentleman is Edmund Watson Taylor, and he was, at that time, he was the president of old E.H. Taylor Distilling Company. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more as I come back, because I think he's on another one of the frames of picture frames that she has. Carl Kagan was a director of the Chamber of Commerce. It's on that picture, and he had a dry goods business down at 105 St. Clair, right down by the Singing Bridge. I did know him very well. He had a brother that was in business with him, and I remember that store quite well. There's another fellow by the name of John W. Gale. All of the Gales back there in those days were very active in the community. And I think that you'll find that those directors of the Frankfort Chamber of Commerce during 1915, 1916 were really and truly outstanding men. Another fine group of men was the directors of the Frankfort Chamber of Commerce during the period of 1926-27. Judge Paulsgrove was a very fine judge of Franklin County for many years. He ran several times. I don't think he was ever defeated. I think he finally just thought he'd had enough. And he was a very fine, I knew him very well. In fact, I've known, I believe, almost all of the people that is on this picture frame here. The next fellow, I shouldn't say fellow, but the next gentleman is T.B. McGregor. McGregor was connected with the People's Bank. And the People's Bank, Marianne, was on the corner of Main and St. Clair in the McClure building, on that very corner down there. A lot of people probably don't realize that, but that's where the People's Bank was located. They called him Judge McGregor, and he was a very fine lawyer, and his place of business on St. Clair Street was only a couple of doors from our building on St. Clair, where the Sower office equipment is located at this time. The president of the Chamber of Commerce in 1926-27 was Edmund Watson Taylor. I just barely mentioned his name, you know, previously, but I knew him very well. I had a tennis court. My father developed a tennis court in our backyard. And we had a girls' tennis court, tennis club. We didn't exclude the men from playing, but it was mainly for the ladies. But Edmund Watson Taylor played back there many, many times. He had a very good friend. Her name was Jamie Luttrell, that he taught to play a very, very fine tennis game. He had what was called Taylor's Camp up on the Kentucky River near Big Eddy. And in the summertime, he would bring the top tennis players out of Louisville, and they would have a big tournament up there. We also went up there, but he also played in my backyard. I knew him very, very well, and he was just a very fine gentleman. There's no question about that. The other fellow's pictures on there is W.W. Thompson, and I must admit I did not know him very well at all. I have a feeling, again, that he was the general manager, director of the Chamber of Commerce. Arnhem Hewlett, another very distinguished gentleman at that time, and he was connected with the People's Bank. And he was with the People's Bank for many years, but then when the Farmers Bank bought out the People's Bank, he came with the Farmers Bank, and that has to do with Mr. Arnhem Hewlett. J. Frank Dutton, he was a very fine man. Mr. Dutton was the Metropolitan Life Insurance agent here in Frankfort. And I remember when I got out of college, when I was graduated from Northwestern University in 1933, he was the very first person that paid me a little visit. And I remember he talked me into purchasing a $20,000 insurance policy with Metropolitan. I thought it was very, very expensive at that time, but I thought, you know, since I did have a little money in my bank account, I thought maybe it was a good investment. So I did purchase that from Mr. J. Frank Dutton. Mary Ann, another very interesting person, was a gentleman by the name of R. Buddy Gale. He ran a drugstore up on Main Street, almost opposite the building that is now owned by, I believe it's owned by the people that used to run the Catherine shop. The place was called Ebner's, and it was a hangout for young people to go. Like when I was growing up, why, it was Pete's Corner. But I had a sister 9 years older than I, and her group always went to Ebner's to hang out. Not only was it a drugstore, but it was a real good place where you could get a real good chocolate soda. And I'd been in there many, many times. He was a very popular person. He was a member of the Rotary Club way back there, as a good many of these other people were also. C.V. Bridwell was the head man of the Southern Bell here in Frankfort. He was a member of the Rotary Club, very active in civic affairs, and a very highly respected gentleman. Another person is Lyle Baker. And this is an interesting story on Lyle Baker. Lyle Baker, as I recall, he started out with, I believe it was the Capital Trust Company, or it could have been the People's Bank. But anyway, Lyle Baker went on when the Farmers Bank took over, bought the Capital Trust Company. The Capital Trust Company, by the way, was right on the corner of Main and St. Clair. So when the Farmers Bank took over that bank, Lyle Baker moved on up to the State National Bank. He wasn't there too long until he moved on to Louisville and became an outstanding banker in Louisville, Kentucky. Right next to him on the pictures is a fellow by the name of L.D. Jones. I knew him very well too. Mr. L.G. Jones was the head man of the State National Bank. The reason I knew him real well, he has a son about my age, and his name was Billy Jones. And Billy Jones went on to be an outstanding banker in Louisville again. Both Lyle Baker and Jones both went on. Another interesting person, of course, in that group is Max Wittgenstein. And I knew him very well, too, because his place of business was only a couple of doors from where we had the old hardware store. He was where the Catherine shop was located. It used to be called Wittgenstein's, or Wittgenstein's, whichever one that you prefer. He was quite active in the Chamber of Commerce and was highly respected by all of the members of the board of directors and of the merchants in town. Quite an active person he was. Mary Ann, this is the third and the last of the pictures. And some of these people I have talked about before. There's Mr. Arnhem Hewlett. And I think I mentioned the fact that he started with the People's Bank, but when the Farmers Bank took over the People's Bank, why, he went with the Farmers Bank. There is another man that I haven't talked about, though, and his name was Mr. Gretter. And he was a highly respected person and a very fine photographer. Oh, your husband would love to have known Mr. Gretter. And I'll say this on the side while this lady is sitting next to me here. Mr. Birch is a very fine photographer in his own way. You know, he puts out, during Christmas time, he puts out these calendars, and I always tell him, I call him up, and if I can't talk to him, I really prefer to talk to his wife anyway. I'll always be sure to tell him, don't forget to put Frank Sower on your list when you come out with that new Christmas calendar. It's just great. But anyway, running along, Mr. Gretter, he tried to hold the line, so to speak, while a great many of us were in World War II service. The Chamber of Commerce during the war is just sort of had dissolved. In fact, it dissolved before that time. But Mr. Gretter tried his best to, just as a lone person, to answer some of the queries and inquiries that came in asking questions about Frankfort, and we respect him a great deal for that. The president of the Chamber of Commerce, 1927-28, was a gentleman by the name of Green Lyons, and I knew him very well too. He would be the grandfather of the gentleman that owns Lyons Lumber Company now. Bert Stevenson is the owner and operator of the Lyons Lumber Company. Very fine. This gentleman was a very fine person, and I'll tell you quickly how close a relationship we had. When we were in the hardware business, about once every year, we'd order a carload of fence and wire and nails. And what we would do, I believe it was 40,000 pounds or something to get up to a carload to get the price of a carload, and I would call Mr. Green Lyons, and he would order a quantity of nails, kegs of nails, and he would get a good price, of course, by just sharing the price of the nails, but it would also help us to get up to 40,000 pounds so we would get the carload price. I always respected Green Lyons. He was a very fine man. Also, Mary Ann Birch, he was the owner. He built, it first was called the Green Lyons Hotel, I believe, at first. But it's across from Pick Pack downtown on 2nd Street, and it later became known as the Southern Hotel. A very, very fine man, Green Lyons. I knew him very well, very well. Another gentleman that's on the this panel is Kenner Taylor. I knew him well too because he lived only about a block from our house. We live on Wilkinson Street, and Kenner Taylor's house is directly across the street from Liberty Hall, and that's where Kenner Taylor lived. He was a distillery. He also had an interest in the People's Bank, but gee, he was a very fine person and related to Edmund Watson Taylor. He ran what was called the Kenner Taylor Distillery for a while out at Jet. You see another gentleman there, maybe I haven't talked with. This is Carl Kagan Jr., and he's related to the older Kagans that had their dry goods store down by the Singing Bridge. They later moved up on Main Street, almost across from what I called Ebner's. You remember I talked about Edmer's drugstore. But anyway, I knew him very well. I've already talked about Judge Palsgrove. I've talked about Max Wittgenstein, and I've already talked about Buddy Gale. So I believe I just about covered all those people there on that panel. But let me go back just a little bit and talk just a little bit, sort of maybe in closing, about the Chamber of Commerce. I never will forget, Mary Ann, when the old Frankfort Board of Trade, when we decided that we wanted to expand, and we wanted to take in lawyers and doctors and everybody, so that we would have a broader membership that could be more helpful rather than just the merchants downtown. I never will forget, we had started our campaign about raising some money. Two incidents that are sort of funny, I think, to talk about is that in going out and trying to raise the money, we were hitting people for $100, which was a lot of money in those days, but we had intended to hit the banks for a whole lot more. And I never will forget, in one of the reports we had, somebody had been to the Farmers Bank and had come back with $100. We just really got upset because we thought, well, we're going to have to go back. We're going to have to go see them again, because we were expecting about $500 or $600 for them, which we did do, and of course they did. They laughed about it, and they did give us more. When we first got started, our goal was to raise $17,000, which we did do. Ben Fowler was very active. Ward Oates was very active. My good friend John Gerard was extremely active. We had a lot of good people that worked hard to get this thing going. A good rounded group, not just the local businessmen downtown. And they were all excited about trying to do what we were trying to achieve. But I never will forget one thing that happened. And I was walking down St. Clair Street one day during this period when we were trying to raise the money. Why, this gentleman, I won't dare not mention his name, but this one gentleman stopped me, and he had been very active in Frankfort, and he said, "Frank, let me tell you, you'll never get it going." I think probably he had been a member of the old Chamber of Commerce that had gone kaplunk, so to speak, and I guess he thought that this bunch of young fellows are not going to do anything to get it started again. But he was wrong. We did get it started. A fellow by the name of Charlie Fink was our very first director. I don't recall that he had a secretary at all, but our place was, if you know where the little barber shop is, there on Ann Street, that's run by Horace Britton. That was the very first cubby hole, so to speak. There's just enough room for Charlie Fink to get a nice desk in there and a chair. But he did very well. We did get started, and we were excited about that. It began to grow a little bit every year, and I remember before long, my good friend Pat Badgett became the secretary under Kenny Miller, and I remember very distinctly that I think they were the only two in there. I don't remember that they had a secretary or not, but I remember that Pat Badgett had an old machine down there where I used to go down there, and it was an A.B. Dick machine where you'd have to type out on a piece of film what you wanted to do, what you wanted to say, and then my friend Pat Badgett, she would put it on this A.B. Dick machine, and she'd crank that thing around, you know, how many different copies that I wanted. So times have changed, you know. I'm Mary Ann Birch now. Mary Ann probably has a copier at the Chambers, or her husband probably has a couple of machines, copying machines, and probably has a fax machine too now, which are great things. It's the technology today is just mind-boggling for me. But anyway, I wanted to emphasize the fact that the Chamber has grown. along comes my son John Sower, and he's mayor, and they were about to tear down the old historic place, the Gooch House we used to call it. It used to be called the Green Gables also. It was on the corner of Capitol Avenue and 2nd Street. And there was a movement underway to maybe they just tear that place down. Well, Johnny got excited, and I got excited, and a group of us got excited, and we got a hold of the city and so forth, and we had a lot of people for us, and so finally it was taken over by the chamber, and enough room in there for the tourism commission too. And I thought it was a great place because there is a spot which is not too far from the Capitol. It has a visibility, traffic going and coming, and it is a perfect place for visitors to come in. And another thing about it, when visitors come in that old building, they're excited, because they're excited about an old antique building that has been kept up and rejuvenated by the chamber, by the tourism, and so forth and so on. But let me go back and just tell you a quick story. I don't want to take up too much time, or the TV people and Mary Ann Birch will be waving at me, but I want to tell you one other little quick story. This has to do a little bit more about the tourism, I guess, than the chamber, Mary Ann, but I don't suppose you'll mind too much because you're interested in both of them, I'm sure. But one thing that we did when I was mayor, we heard about the fact that Lexington had a hotel motel tax. About that same time, we were trying to build the towers, and the state was, but also the city. This is something interesting. The city, the county, state, federal, all got together to build the Civic Center. Our part of the city's obligation, and the county's too, was $25,000 a year. Not a whole lot of money, but about as much as we could afford. So I thought, well, where are we going to come up with $25,000 extra every year? So I had heard about Lexington passing a hotel motel tax. I think theirs at that time was 3%, so I said our obligation would be great. We'd get enough money, it wouldn't hurt anybody locally, because a lot of the businessmen would write it off as business expense as they went through Frankfort and stayed at our motels and hotels. And also the first obligation was the $25,000 that we received would go to our obligation on the Civic Center. Do you follow me? Well, the first year, I never will forget, I think we only took in about $18,000. So we had to come up, I think, with about another $7,000. But now, as you probably know, it has grown tremendously, and now it helps the tourism, Frankfort tourism, tremendously, and I'm just so very pleased with that. And as a matter of fact, the Chamber of Commerce, bless their hearts, they've just done a great job. They've had so many very fine presidents. Sure, I know you have to have a good board of directors, but you have to have the leadership, and the Chamber has had outstanding leaderships. I'll brag on my friend Mary Ann Birch a little bit. She's a very fine president, I think, a couple of years ago. I won't name all of them that I think are good, because I'd miss somebody and they say, "Oh, Frank, you didn't say anything about me." But the present Dave Weller, I think he's going to be a good one. He seems very active, and that's what it takes. You have to be active to get anything done. So I'm real pleased that what little I have done to help the Chamber of Commerce. I've been pleased with my association with the tourism, and I think they're both getting along so very, very well. The money's coming in pretty good now, and the membership, I notice they still send me these bulletins, both the Chamber and the tourism. They send me these bulletins, and sometimes they call me up to see if I won't come, and they still call me, ask me if I'll take a tour occasionally, And I don't take as many, Mary Ann, as I used to. I tell them, you know, don't call me more than once a week. You know, my friend Pat Badgett, he used to call me maybe a couple or 3 times a week, which 10 years ago I was glad to do. But I've enjoyed people. I've enjoyed taking the peoples on the tours, and I've met people. We've had them from California, Maine, Florida, Texas, and most everybody that comes to Frankfort, if you tell them a few little stories and then tell them about the history of Frankfort, they're so pleased. There's so much history here, Mary Ann, so much history. We were a frontier town way back there in the late 1700s, and there's so much history here. The corner-in celebrities, even up there at the Frankfort Cemetery, there's so many. You know, there's 17 governors buried up there. There's a Vice President of the United States that is buried up there, and of course our artist is buried up there. Paul is up there, Paul Sower, and we have a lot of very notable people that are buried in the Frankfort Cemetery. But there's a lot to see here. The Chamber of Commerce and the tourism, not just me, you know, oh Lordy, it takes a lot of people, but you do have to have leadership to really get it going. And I'm just very happy to have been a part of it, Mary Ann Birch. Thank you so much for inviting me.